So if you were to give advice to somebody that was just starting off in their entrepreneurial journey, it would be those kind of things.
Yeah, I think you've got to listen to people. I don't think I did. If I was being honest, I didn't listen enough.
Okay.
And it's a great skill to have. You can listen to clients, but listen to other people telling me how to run a business. You know, that's, I think with us men, it's a bit of an ego. With me, it's a bit of an ego thing, maybe.
Sure.
And I think you've got to let that go as soon as possible. The more advice you can get, the better.
Okay, Andy, thanks for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Something I found really interesting when I spoke to you originally at the Creative Circles event in Leith was the history of your company. When your company began, kind of loosely matches the history of the internet almost.
It does indeed, yeah. We're right up there in the early days of the commercial internet, that's for sure. And it was 1995 when we started. And at that time, it was all terribly exciting. I had 2 very young children, and it was all very scary because it was all so new. And I guess I would follow along the lines of the classic entrepreneur, starting out my back bedroom.
It's interesting as well because for those children, they probably don't really know a life other than the one of the internet. I know for me specifically, when I think back to life before the internet, I mean, I've got a relatively good memory of kind of when I was younger, but it's always kind of been there somewhere in the background. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't there for me, and I discovered it at the time. I was freelancing for NCR up in Dundee, and I was working as an illustrator, and it was great. And they were quite a forward-thinking company. They had headquarters in Alberta. And Atlanta, sorry, I beg your pardon. And they were using the internet to connect offices together. And I'll never forget the first day I saw the internet because it was quite extraordinary. I remember going to the phone directory, which was online, and discovering all of a sudden there were 30 people with the same name and hadn't seen that before. And I asked one of the software engineers, said, "Oh yeah, we're using the internet to connect offices together." And I thought, "Oh, I've heard of the internet. Can you show me?" And we went downstairs to one of the labs, and he showed me Yahoo, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. You know, there was websites categorized by country, by type, and you know, you can go and visit a website in a country, in any country it seemed, and it was quite extraordinary, and it was changing. You know, you go back the next day, and that directory had tripled or doubled in size, and you know, there's that feeling of a real dynamic growth. And I just said, "Wow, how is all that happening? Who's doing all of that?" And he said, "Well, it's really easy." I said, "Really?" And he talked about this thing called HTML, and I was familiar with something similar called SGML, which I think is a markup language used in the publishing sector. So I said, "Oh, great. Well, I think I know that." Obviously, I didn't. And I said, "Would you mind showing it to me?" So he very kindly spent the next few weeks of his lunchtime showing me HTML, and that was it. You know, as soon as I sort of got an idea, I remember I just went to NCR and I said, "Look, I'm leaving." And that very day, I drove from Dundee to Ely, where I knew my accountant was. She was on holiday. And I think I must have got there about 7 o'clock. I knocked on the door. She said, "Oh, hello." I said, "Alison, I need to set up a company now."
Wow.
I was just so excited by the prospect. And she wasn't best pleased, actually. She said, "I've got dinner guests arriving in half an hour, and I can't do it now." So she told me what I needed to do. So I went to company's house, and on the 22nd of August, 1995, that was it. I set it all up. So, and that was an exciting time.
Incredible. Yeah, it's different in a way, but it's similar to how I felt when I first came across podcasts. Almost, yeah. I thought, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of this kind of this conversation that seems to be blowing up right now.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite an interesting parallel.
Yeah.
So what happened from that point? You set up your company called Web?
Yeah. We were called Web Advertising, and we've just recently shortened it to Web because everyone calls us Web. So yeah, it was really interesting, trying to...
you can tell that you were one of the first people in there as well, because surely Web is the name that everybody would want if they were setting up an internet company.
Exactly, yeah. So domain names were quite expensive in those days, for about £400 each. So, and that's quite a significant investment for something that you weren't convinced necessarily, or a lot of people weren't convinced it was going to last.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast today actually where somebody was talking about how people would actually have portfolios of domain names. They would go around buying and selling domain names because they were that much of an asset.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that then became illegal. You had to show that you were using them. So
right.
Yeah. So, but that forced a false market. But at that time, I had about £10,000 worth of savings. And I managed to get a bank loan for £10,000. I thought, well, that would be plenty. But it took a long time to convince people because the internet was so slow.
Mm.
And I came within about £1,000 of going bust. And that was quite a challenge because I'd given up a good freelance career. I had plenty of work. And we got a client, Lauder College in Fife. And they invested about £7,000. And that was quite a significant amount of money, but it was more significant that they'd invested that amount. And that gave me the faith to press on. And there's some pretty torrid times, but it was great. So that was the beginning of it all, really.
And what were you doing at this point? You were doing web development, web design?
Both.
Okay.
There wasn't, to be frank, much development in those days because it was really fundamental stuff. All hand-coded pages in HTML, which I taught and taught myself effectively and mastered it within about 3 months or so. But then there wasn't a huge amount to master. It is only a markup language. It's not technically speaking, a coding, software coding program.
Yeah, explain HTML because somebody, as if they didn't know anything. I mean, I don't know a great deal about it, so... Yeah, what is HTML?
Well, we kind of have to just wind back the clock a little bit and just look at how the internet arrived, and then HTML came soon after that. So it was the American Defensive Department funded what was called ARPANET then, and that was about 1989. And this was technology which allowed not just computers to be connected together, but computer networks with lots of computers on them, and that was quite a breakthrough. And soon after, in 1990, it was a British physicist working at CERN, who's now Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He wrote a memo to his colleagues saying that he thinks we should develop a language which was then hypertext markup language to run on top of this network. And that was kind of the beginning of web design. So he created this markup language that allowed you to manipulate text in an image, or text in images effectively. And soon after that, there's a thing called CSS, or cascading style sheets, which allowed you then to manipulate it further and to add color. If you wanted to make a heading bigger, you could do that, and you could place it in a certain position on the page. But it was pretty basic. You couldn't do an awful lot. Which is just as well because, the internet was, where are we now? Yeah, so at that time it was about 56K modems. So the page would load very slowly and in chunks. And so you wouldn't want to be too adventurous anyway, but it was a way of delivering information. And yeah, blimey, it was, so much has changed. So that's the fundamental thing. And if anyone's interested in learning HTML or learning about web design, just look at HTML because that's still there. That's
still the building blocks that people use today. Okay.
So there's CSS and then there's JavaScript built on top of it, but any web page is still running on HTML, on the fundamental language, which is great because it's a universal thing. It works across Mac and PCs and phones and everything. So it's brilliant.
So in the beginning, you were approaching businesses and saying like, I'll help you I'll run this code, I'll help create some kind of website for you.
Yeah, I think I was totally inspired by looking at Yahoo and going to New York and going to LA and going to Silicon Valley and looking at what other web companies were doing. I remember I had this crazy idea that I took round to solicitors and estate agents. I said, look, we need to build a central database of properties for sale. We can do commercial, we can do residential. You guys put it all up. I'll stick it on a website and people can go to one place to find property that they want to buy or whatever. And I took it around to several places and I just couldn't get any interest from anyone.
That's incredible, because as you're saying this, I'm thinking, well, yeah, that seems like the obvious thing because it seems so normal to me now. But well, at the time, people weren't buying it.
No, the internet was too slow. I remember one guy, he was a lawyer, and he said, I think it's a great idea, but I just don't think the internet's going to last.
Wow.
I know. And that kind of paused for thought for about a minute.
Yeah.
Then I just every time, any spare moment, I was looking on the internet and other companies and seeing what they're doing. And I think that was one of the problems in the early days, is getting some kind of focus, because there were so many things that were happening. eBay had just started up. And there was that excitement and that buzz of dynamic development.
So what changed for you then? You were going around trying to having these ideas with the property websites and whatnot. People weren't buying it. You went through all your savings. You got within £1,000 of your overdraft. What happened?
I think you get momentum, and I think you get a name. I was even doing websites for nothing for people just to prove a point, and we just got really lucky. A sequence of events happened. We won some business with our dynamic editor in Edinburgh, and they got a new chief exec who came from Manchester. She worked there for a few years. She brought in her marketing director who liked what we were doing. And they were both leaving to go back down to Manchester to the Lowry, which is a big theatre and art space. And they said, would you be interested in pitching? And we said, yeah. And it's a decent-sized budget. And at that time, we'd developed some new technologies of our own. We'd written all our own software. And some of them were proved to be really useful to them. One of them particularly was a web marketing tool, a webmail tool, which was sending bulk emails. That was before MailChimp. And they were sending brochures to 250,000 people around the northwest of England.
Wow.
3 times a year. And that was a massive expense. And we said, we can just query your database, pull out all these email addresses and send them an email. And they sort of started leaning forward. And then we said, we'll show you. And we did a live demo in the pitch, which I would never recommend doing to anyone because they never go right. And it worked.
Wow.
And it came into their inbox and they just saw it and thought, they just, I think it was a question of when can we start?
When was this?
So that was around 2000. And that was pretty much unheard of then. And for theatres, it was always a challenge to make enough money to put on further shows and do their development work. So, there was a fantastic case study that we sent an email to a dedicated opera audience that sold £36,000 worth of tickets overnight. And that was unheard of. No one else was doing that really at that time. So they wrote a case study, and then we just started getting phone calls from theatres up and down the country. And that kind of started a little bit of momentum. But, one thing I haven't talked about is my lack of ability to run a company. And I would argue that any entrepreneur has absolutely no idea how to run I have no idea about accounting. It's all totally alien to me. So, I failed to seize that momentum.
That's comforting to hear, by the way.
Yeah. It's I don't think entrepreneurs are very good business people, and that's often why they're very successful. The board comes in and says, "Thank you very much, and we'll manage this now," and I think that's perfectly okay.
So from that point onward, did you start expanding your team and bringing in people like accountants and other people that maybe knew a little bit more about how to run the other day-to-days of a company? Yeah,
I was able to afford to outsource the accounting and marketing. I brought in marketing people. And we started, developing our own products. So we wrote software for Shop and for content management system. And, in that time, it was the culture to develop your own applications because they weren't really out there. When we did this mail campaign for Visit Britain, they said, that's great. We want everybody to go to these destination pages, but can you tell us what buttons they're clicking on? And we just said yes, effectively. We didn't really give it much thought. It's such a great client. So we did that, and they said, okay, can we see that in real time? And we said, yeah, because that's what you do. And yeah, we weren't really making any money out of that application, but that effectively was a precursor to Google Analytics. That's way before Google Analytics came along. So, we were kind of exploring technology, and it was really down to one guy. I would say at that time I employed a guy called Will Foreman, who was just a genius. He loved what he did. He had loads of ideas, and the two of us together would just kept saying yes to stuff.
That's the key, is it? Just say yes.
Except he had the ability to deliver on it.
Okay.
I was good at talking about it and saying yes. So I think, the pair of us, we worked together for about 6 years. It was great.
Wow.
Yeah.
So from that point forward, things continued on the up, did they? Or?
They did, yeah. We, as I say, we had a little bit of momentum, but then any threat to any business is technology itself, and technologies were changing. So soon after we started writing our own content management system, Shop WordPress came along, Joomla came along, and others. And people started to like the idea of open source software, because the stuff that we were writing, despite it being well written, it wasn't necessarily stable because technology wasn't stable. The internet technologies weren't that stable. So you had to charge a high support fee.
Can you explain the difference between open source and what you do?
Okay. So open source is coding which is managed and delivered and designed by a community of developers.
Okay.
Who don't have any interest in the product other than to better it. And bespoke software is something that we write, and we would license that to a client. So we would write a content management system, say, right, we'll charge you X amount per year to use this software. And that then was the model. So that was quite a significant change, and it took us a while to really grasp that. And again, going back to the ability to run a company, what I hadn't noticed is that the income was starting to slide a little bit. And that's because people weren't paying didn't want to pay license fees for software. And the thing that really distorted it is we got a massive project, and it was brilliant. And that caused a spike. But actually, the underlying thing was sliding.
Okay.
And of course, because I wasn't managing the company properly, I didn't know how to do that. We had a bit of a downturn, but it was fine. It was easy to manage. We just had to change. And it's quite difficult, even though we're a small company. We've never been any more than 6 people. We've always been around that mark. Change is quite difficult, getting people to change the mindset. So we adopted open source software. And that was, so we've done all of that. And we still use some of our own software, which is great. So that was a significant change and a bit of a threat to the business. But we rode that storm.
You must have to weather quite a few storms, actually, because if I could pick any business where the ground underneath is changing as quickly, I think the internet would be the one that springs to mind the fastest.
Yeah, I think in a sense we're quite lucky because we're there from the beginning, and change was just normal. Yeah, and change was 3 months. A new technology would come along every 3 months. So you kind of were used to it. So had we been a slightly younger company and gone through that change, it may have been different because we didn't have that culture to change. I used to give my developers time to come up with new ideas. So we weren't always working on client work. We'd say, right, go and find something that's interesting you on the internet. And that's how we, in some respects, survived. We came up with new ideas, and then every so often, on a weekly meeting would say to them, you've got 15 minutes to pitch this idea. And
nice, I like that.
yeah, it's good. Yeah. And of course they loved it. Software engineers love that kind of thing. And it's just exciting because there's so much stuff going on. You just, not every, you can't see it all.
Sure.
And that was a bit of a challenge.
So is there anything you would do differently when you look back on some of those ups and downs or some of those storms or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots. I would spend more bucks on marketing.
Right.
And I would learn a little bit more about fundamentally running a business. Business is a bit like a car. It needs petrol, it needs servicing, it needs oil. And it's really that simple. It's not a complicated equation. It needs marketing, it needs sales, it needs operations, it needs technicians, and it needs client retention. As soon as you grasp that idea, it's fine.
So if you were to give advice to somebody that was just starting off in their entrepreneurial journey, it would be those kind of things.
Yeah. I think you've got to listen to people. I don't think I did. If I was being honest, I didn't listen enough.
Okay.
It's a great skill to have. I can listen to clients, but listen to other people telling me how to run a business. That's, I think with us men, it's a bit of with me, it's a bit of an ego thing maybe.
Sure.
And I think you've got to let that go as soon as possible. The more advice you can get, the better.
Yeah. No, I think it's something I struggle with as well. There's a kind of immediate knee-jerk reaction to somebody telling you something. It's like, oh, what do you know? Like, who says you know better than I do? But no, that's good advice and definitely something I'm going to try and take on board. Cool. So we kind of talked a bit about web design there. How do you think web design has evolved since 1995? Although, what is web design? First of all, if somebody came up to you and said, what is web design? Can you sell it to me? Can you tell me what it is?
It's a really basic thing. It allows you to manipulate content on a page using a very basic language called HTML. And that is coupled with something called CSS, where you can change color, you can add animations and things like that. It's a very simple thing to do, but it's also a very complex thing to learn. There are some fundamental principles you need to stick to, but if you take the principles of graphic design and typography and then apply those to a user interface and think about principles of a kiosk or a banking machine, is that people go to a web interface or a web page with a task in mind, and they don't want to be made to think. So you have to be really careful about, it's not just about designing something that's pretty, it's designing something that's really functional, and small changes can have quite a big impact. So it's like graphic design, but with functionality and a fundamental understanding of how people use products and technology.
Okay. And what would you say to somebody, say there's somebody watching this or listening to this at the minute, and they're interested in web design and they'd like to become a web designer? How would you guide them to approach that? Where should they come at it?
You can learn yourself. There's loads of tutorials online. The basic language is HTML, and I would recommend anyone to learn that. It won't take long. It's a simple markup language which is still used after all these years. We're at HTML5 now, but I would start with the real basic principles. And HTML5 delivers animations, and we can put in video content and audio files and all that sort of thing. But it's really about tagging it and making it usable. So yeah, it's just start with fundamental HTML and then learn CSS. And then if you're really clever, you can learn JavaScript and go on further and start programming. But if you're a young kid, it's a fantastic entry point. Because if I can do it.
Can you speak any other languages other than HTML?
No.
Because I was going to ask if it compared to learning a foreign language, how easy or difficult do you think that would be in comparison? How much?
That's a very good question.
How much is there to learn in the language? How many kind of commands, and I mean, how much code is there to actually to grasp?
With HTML, there aren't that many. But HTML is then guided with CSS, and there could be quite a lot.
Okay.
Because you're saying, make this this tag appear here at this size. And when someone presses it, it does this. So it can have other actions associated to it. So there could be quite a lot. You know, in a typical web application, you could have 10,000 lines of code. But that would be HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then the other code that's applied to that web page for any functionality that's built into it.
Okay. And so I use Squarespace for my web page, which is very, very basic at the minute. How are these? You mentioned kind of open source platforms coming along and posing a bit of difficulty or a bit of a challenge to you and your company. How have websites like Wix or Squarespace, how have you dealt with that kind of competition?
Their market is slightly different to ours. So Squarespace is a very clever application, and it's a system you kind of buy into. You pay a monthly subscription to. You get template designs. You have a content management system built into it, or an e-commerce system. You get hosting as part of that package. You get a domain name and support. So it's all kind of built in into one system. And if you are keen on publishing yourself, you can do, and you can do it all yourself. And generally speaking, those kind of websites are a little bit smaller. So compared to what we would do, for example, if a client came to us and it was a theatre, they would want the ability to be able to display events, which is linked to a box office system. So we need to integrate the box office system to the event system so it can display ticket prices and allocation in real time. So then that's a whole different ballgame. You need software engineers to be able to connect these systems up using lots of different languages and things called APIs, which is an interface between one system and another. And so also if you're a retail outlet and you want to connect say your website to your stock control system so that people can buy clothes that are available and not actually sold out. Or if you wanted to connect your website inquiries directly into your CRM system, your customer relationship management application, then that's where we come in. So these are more sophisticated, and actually we call them products. We call them software products. It's not really a website.
Okay, so it's a question of scale, really.
Yeah.
I've heard you mention theatre quite a bit. Is that one of your main client areas? Is theatres, is it?
Yeah, it was. Theatre and tourism is something that we kind of where we had momentum in the early days, and we're still working with theatres. It's kind of a good fit for us. From us, it's quite challenging. You know, we have to connect to a box office system. We have to manage lots of events throughout the week and the month, and they have to be archived, and we have to write software that automatically archives them and displays them and sells tickets for them and promotes them. Yeah,
it's quite a bit of pressure as well when you've got a live event that's probably running on, well, most definitely must be running on the smooth operation of the website.
Yeah.
And the ticket sales and whatnot.
Yeah, if it goes wrong, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Someone's going to lose income or ticket sales. And yeah, I remember working with the Manchester International Festival when tickets went on sale. We had over 1,000 transactions a second. And that's pretty scary. That is really scary stuff. So your code's got to stand up to that, and the server's got to stand up to those kind of loadings. Normally you'd have nowhere near that. So, yeah, it's exciting.
Cool. So I thought we'd maybe move on to a kind of more general discussion about the internet, because it's something I enjoy thinking about quite a bit. It's a fascinating fascinating area, and it seems to be changing so much right now, and there seems to be lots of difficulties, and obviously you've got the kind of the big data scandals that's happened with Facebook, and you've got things like Article 13 and various different things that are happening with the internet just now. So yeah, I thought it would be good to speak to you about that, because you've seen it all essentially, and because your company is very much centered around web design and web development. I just thought I'd ask your kind of opinion on the internet at the moment and where you see it going.
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's a difficult one. The data breaches that we're seeing is really scary, but not surprising at all. We've seen some big databases of customer data very exposed, and we've seen multiple hacks and break-ins to these database systems that we've looked at and taken over as clients. So I don't think the thinking's right at the moment. I don't think people are really thinking about security. They just think it's going to be fine. But, you know, I think we need to rethink that whole thing. And, you know, it's a really difficult one. I think one thing that really highlighted all of this for me was Mark Zuckerberg being interviewed by Congress. And it was quite illuminating, the questions that they were asking, and clearly they had no idea that what he was really talking about. And that's a worry. These people are, in theory, setting the laws of the land.
Yeah, there was some hilarious kind of meme material there where he was essentially just explaining the internet to these old people.
I know that's a worry, and to a certain extent, you know, the Christopher Wiley with you know, the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower. You know, he was up in front of the Commons Committee, and he was talking in great detail about data analytics and data sets and how it'd been exploited and possibly influencing the EU referendum. And I just don't know if they really got what he was talking about. To be frank, I was struggling a little bit with it. But, you know, this is important that we get this bit right. I don't think you can rely on capitalist institutions like Google and Facebook to govern themselves. They've got to make money. And, you know, I just feel that the governing organizations are a long way behind this and a long way behind the curve. So it's a slightly pessimistic view, actually. But, you know, there's great stuff going on. So
of course, yeah. Okay, so how should we fix that? Do you think we should have more people within government that are literate with these kind of questions and these kind of debates when it comes to technology? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be specialist units created who know what they're talking about. Yeah, you can't have it any other way. But I think the next generation coming through, you know, as you say, it's part of their makeup. They understand it, they get it. I think there's an inbuilt fear to that generation, you know, my generation to a certain extent. And you're talking about technology. Oh no, I don't understand it. Show me a car engine, I'll get it. I can see the bits moving. So yes, I think we do need a little bit more sophistication in the governing bodies.
Do you think there's going to be any change in relation to the advertising model? Because that's something I've heard discussed on a few podcasts. In particular, one guy, I think Jaron Lanier, if that's how you pronounce his name. He's kind of put forward the idea that we need to change away from an advertising model to more something akin with a subscription model. Is that something you've thought about at all?
Yeah, for Google. Yeah, I think he's right. Can we see that happening? I don't know. That's a massive shift. And the real challenge is that for Google alone, their revenue amounts to about 90% of their turnover from ads.
Just to explain, sorry, just in case people don't realize what it is that we're talking about. At the moment, obviously, the big tech companies make their money through giving their services away for free, like Facebook and Google, but taking our data essentially and passing it on to a third party that will then use it for advertising, and that's how they generate their money.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
That's it at the minute. And this guy, Jaron Lanier, had proposed not only him, I'm sure there's others, that we need to move to something more akin with Netflix or these systems that we pay for, but we pay for knowing that our data isn't being passed on to a third party.
Yeah, and it's a great idea, but again, it needs to be managed by somebody else. The problem we have is that, as he talks about, we made this decision a long time ago to go to that business model of using ads to generate revenue. But there's also an ecosystem below there of agencies all over the globe who are selling ads, who are selling services into those ads to customers, who are spending a lot of money advertising. So that's going to break their revenues. So how's that going to be managed? And also, if you stop Google from advertising and they go to a subscription model, all the people who want to pay for advertising will shift over to Yahoo, who used to be the main search engine. So then Google won't allow that to happen. They don't want to see their authority go. So it needs to be managed by somebody else. I don't think you can leave that to the
free market, essentially.
I don't think so. It would be nice to think that they could manage it, but I can't see it.
Yeah.
I mean, the subscription model is working. We've gone from, the newspapers being, really struggling. And now I think it was the New York Times, 130,000 new subscribers last year.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a complete turnaround. And as you say, Netflix is working. Spotify is working, just. So we're used to subscribing, and I think there may well be a change, but when you have, like I say, an organization like Google relying 90% of their turnover is coming from there.
And when you say Spotify is working, I've heard mixed things about who it's working for.
Yes.
If it's working for the performers and the content creators, because it's something I think about as well, about how if I ever wanted to monetize something like a podcast further down the line, how I would go about doing that. And it's hard to just get past this idea that we've got, that we've had since the beginning, that digital media should be free.
Yeah.
It seems to be ingrained within, even myself, when I come up against a paywall on something like the New York Times or the Scotsman or the Herald or something, there is that kind of, why should I be paying for this? It's kind of inbuilt within us that if it's on the internet, then it should be free. And I guess it's something we've got to try and get past, because it's never free, essentially.
That's right, because this is someone's livelihood. Well, there's another issue as well, because if you're an illustrator, a filmmaker, or a photographer, the chances are that photographer has signed a customer release form to say, I will use this photograph in this billboard ad, or on TV, or on a specific web page. And then somebody takes that and uses it somewhere else, and that's a breach of copyright. And that's the same with music. If it gets spread illegally, then there's a loss of revenue to the copyright holder. So whilst we want freedom, we also need to be fair to individuals. It's fine when you're a big, you're very wealthy and you're a celebrity and you've got plenty of cash. But for struggling artists and designers, it's tough. And you need every help you can get. So if people are stealing your images and they're gaining and you're not, then that's where it's unfair.
I think that's a nice segue into Article 13 itself, because that's something that seems to be dividing. To some people you speak to, it's the death of the internet, and the memes are over, and to other people you speak to, they're like, no, I think it was overwhelmingly supported by authors and photographers and musicians and people that were actually creating their own content, and the real kind of pushback was coming from memesters and people that that wanted to be able to take media and do what they want with it. Have you been following Article 13 at all? Yeah.
There's a lot of rhetoric about it, and right now there's two texts. The EU Parliament have got their text, and the government have got their text, and they need to agree now what they're going to propose going forward. The first bill failed in July, and then it was adopted on September the 12th. So now it's about working out the detail of what Article 11 and what Article 13 is going to actually be. It's always about the devil is in the detail. And I understand this is going to vote in the springtime. So it's not law, it's a directive. So there's still time to change it all. But it's just a question of being sensible. You know, they're talking about having upload filters, content filters to filter out copyrighted material in Article 13. I mean, that's going to be a challenge technically to do that. I don't know of it. I'm not aware of any technology that can do that.
And if there is, it will be big, rich companies that can afford that kind of technology. I mean, for the little guy, it's going to be a lot harder to implement that kind of level of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't see it happening.
Yeah.
So there needs to be some consideration for all. And Article 11 is about more journalistic stuff. So, if you're aggregating news stories on a web page and then getting a lot of traffic to that web page and then selling ads on that page, then the content holders of those news articles, the journalists who've written it, aren't getting any benefit from that. So that's what Article 11 is about, is trying to get an even platform where they can generate wealth from it or be in more control of it. So that's called the link tax, or has been dubbed the link tax. So there's a lot of detail to be sorted out. I think in principle it's right, but how you administer that is a potential minefield.
And it's been tied up obviously with the debate around the EU and Brexit and whatnot. Well, I've heard some people tying it into that because it's an EU directive.
Yeah,
that's being cast in a light in relation to that. But I think you're right in terms of the devil being in the detail. You've got to read up on these things and really look into it, because I've seen a lot of hysteria that's been whipped up around it with some kind of prominent YouTubers that are just kind of painting it in a certain light. Yeah, that's maybe not doing justice to the actual nitty gritty of both sides of the debate.
Yeah, no, I agree that there's a lot, as always, there's a lot of that. But it's just a question of, the two texts as they are at the moment are available on the internet, and you can see both versions on one web page. So I can't remember the address, but I'll find it. And it's worthwhile. You can go and read it yourself, and you can see the amendments being proposed. So if you can understand it, then it's worth forming your own opinion.
Well, maybe further down the line, when it's passed or not passed, we can get back together again and have another discussion. Listen, it's been really great talking to you. Why don't you tell people where they can find out more about yourself and your company?
Oh, great. Well, it's been a pleasure. You can find us through our website, madewithweb.com, and you'll see all our social channels there, so feel free to subscribe or just give us a call.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Hey, how you doing? Liam again. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Haverin. If you did, then please consider subscribing to us on YouTube and on iTunes, and sharing this with your family and friends on social media. Feel free to leave us a comment below and let us know your thoughts. Thanks very much.